Thank you. Yeah, 10 days ago, I was lecturing in Greece, then Italy, and now Red Deer. I like exotic places. So I'm glad to be here. I've got too much material. I noticed that the notes, I've got a lot of animation, and so there's a lot of overlap over text. So I'll be sending a new PDF so you could get access to it, but I'll be here all day. You can come to me, chat, you can challenge me, just don't beat me up. So that's the only thing I'm asking. So we'll be talking about mitigating the risk of avian influenza. We have a situation that is different from what we've had many years ago. This is from an article published 2 weeks ago, early June of this year. And they looked at the connection between strains of H5N1 in the United States and in Europe. And what you have is a very colorful circle there. You have origin regions of the strains and destination regions. To make a long story short, what we've discovered is that you have like viruses that would come from the north, which is expected, going from Northern Europe to Central Europe to Southern Europe. And similarly in the United States and even Canada. But now we see also the other way around, with these strains coming from the south to the center to the north. Now, this is unusual. This is not something we've seen in the past. We have a lot of variants out there, and this particular virus, it's part of a constellation of H5N1s, and it's a particular clade, like a genetic group that's it's called 2344B. It's a game changer. Now, there's some good news to a certain extent. In 2022, we had a lot of wildlife being affected with this disease. In fact, so far in the world, we've had 274 different bird species affected with the virus, okay? And many of them, of course, are wild birds and are dying. It was all over Canada in 2022. And you can see that in 2023, for the first 4 months, at first 3 months, it looked about the same. And then in April, we noticed compared to last year, big drop. Now, it could be because people are tiring of reporting dead birds, okay? So we know for sure, if you notice, 2023, Calgary and Edmonton have had wild birds reported with the virus. There's a switch. And that's kind of a bit makes us uneasy. Raptors are more and more found dead with the virus. And of course, the way they die is because they go and chew on dead animals, because there's not only birds dying from this, but a lot of mammalians. Now we're up to about 40 different mammalian species affected with this virus worldwide. In Europe, like in Canada, we see in the next pictures slide, there's a reduction in domestic birds being affected, but in their case, in Europe, seagulls are having more and more problems. So they know that the environment is staying contaminated. If we look in the United States and Canada for domestic birds, you can see that we have quite a bit of a drop in both countries when it comes to the number of infected farms. In April of this year, most of that was in Quebec. You need to realize that although we had several cases, there were 2 outbreaks in Ontario and over 10 in Quebec, but that was in a very limited area where we had a mix of duck farms, and ducks are a big issue here, domestic ducks, duck farms with egg layers, turkeys and breeders in a region where you could walk from one farm to the next. And so they all went down almost at the same time. But so it was a cluster, so it doesn't mean that it's blowing up. So far, at least in domestic birds, It's not too bad, although in Europe, I could have said that a month ago, but now it's picking up in places like in France. And the other thing that makes us still anxious, stressed, is the fact that we're noticing in Canada in particular, in Ontario and Quebec, a mutation on some of the strains. If you look at the title of this paper that just came out a few days ago, they talk about mesocarnivores in Canada. Mesocarnivore is an animal that will eat meat about 50 to 70% of the time. Otherwise, maybe some insects and fruits and whatever they can find. So we're talking foxes, skunks, this type of animal. They found a mutation that is like the first step towards a virus that could be transmitted between humans, okay? There are 3 mutations that are needed, plus a change in a protein, a neoprotein on the virus that would be necessary for this virus to make COVID look like a mild flu, okay, in humans. So we're far from being close to a catastrophe scenario, but that first mutation has been recorded. So although my point is that we got to pay attention, we don't want this thing to keep spreading and stay endemic. Now, Delgado at USDA 2 weeks ago gave a talk, and I got her slides, I got connections. And she presented risk factors from studies done in the United States from 2015 to 2022. And in there, she looked at risk factors. The main risk factors were location, where the farm is, rendering. So rendering, it's not that the renderer is a problem, but if people go where the rendering container is, and they don't pay attention when they come back to the farm, that's where the risk occurs. And we've noticed that not only for avian influenza in several countries, but also for other diseases, including coronavirus in turkeys, Mycoplasma gallisepticum, PRRS in pigs. If you have pigs, you're going to have an increase in risk with rendering. And of course, all sorts of visits, workers commingling, again, with other bugs as well, like Mycoplasma. We see that in the United States a lot. I was a professor in the United States for many years, and we've seen this. Shared vehicles, equipment in Scandinavia, 35 times more at risk of having avian influenza if you're sharing equipment between farms. Wild birds on farms, well, it's been associated mainly with feed spills, which is something we see at times, and of course, water bodies near farms, that's a big risk. Now, the last 2 studies done in the United States were in egg layers and turkeys, and case control studies. So what they do is they look at farms that had the problem, and then they go see neighbors that had birds at risk within the same area, but did not have the problem. And of course, being in the control zone is bad news. When there's a case and you're nearby, you had greater risk, about 10 times, 7 to 10 times. The odds ratio is the number of times you're more at risk. But most of the risk factors had to do with transportation, okay? Rendering or the entrance, no farm entrance gate, not changing clothing, when getting in, sharing trailers, that kind of stuff, okay? So these were the main risk factors. So that's why I'm going to spend a minute to talk about the big principles for structural and operational biosecurity, okay? It's quite simple. If you have a Bible, okay, go to the Old Testament, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, you're going to find the first 2 principles. We've known since 2,600 years ago how to deal with infectious diseases. We have not invented anything, by the way, okay? The first principle is to reduce sources of contamination. So when we do cleaning, we're trying to reduce the source of contamination. When we remove used litter or we we do something like that, that is remove animals. We're trying to reduce sources of contamination. And then we want to have separation for our healthy flocks from sources of contamination. So in COVID, what did they try to do? Well, public health was saying, wash your hands. Well, reducing a source of contamination. Stay away from people, okay? Well, that's separation, okay? So everything we're trying to do on a farm for the past thousands of years is these two things. And then if you're in a highly dense area, poultry area, you need to start talking, organizing. In the United States, integrators who are competitors will tell their veterinarians, you guys sit down and talk. You can give information about specific farms when it comes to serious diseases like that. We're not talking coccidiosis. We're talking important diseases. I was allowed to say the things there in the United States that would get me to lose my right to practice in Canada. Okay, because they felt it was important to have the right communication when we're dealing with a serious condition like this. So here what you have is a list of just about all the risk factors that we should be worried about regarding infectious diseases, and in particular with avian influenza, and that includes aerosol. By the way, I'll be talking about that by the end of my talk. You can categorize these as mainly related to location and management, okay? And some poultry, of course, you have spiking males, for example, and we don't know the status of these animals, of these birds. That could be an issue. But there's 4 columns. You don't see it too well, but the first one is reducing. There's a lot of risk of mitigation that we can do as far as reducing sources of contamination. When it comes to management in particular, and for separation, also for management, poultry, and location. And the third column has to do with regional issue, regional biosecurity. I won't have time to talk about this today, but that's an issue we need to address. The last column, that's humans, okay? The largest rodent we have on farms, okay? Now, they are connected to the majority of the risk factors. So we need to deal with these individuals, all right? And I won't have time to talk about it today. You'll have to reinvite me. But there's a lot of innovations that's coming up. A lot of stuff with sensors that will facilitate having biosecurity measures, at least we hope, and it's connected to a lot of these risk factors. I won't talk about it today, but there's research being done there as we speak. So this virus, this clade 2344B, is a game changer. So we need a paradigm shift. The first one has to do with biosecurity, that regional biosecurity, but mainly compliance. Okay, you may have a good plan, but if the people are not following it, are not doing things correctly, you have a problem. Okay, and that is something I see in all the countries I go to. Okay, whether it's in Canada, United States, France, Mexico, I've lived in all these countries, and I see about the same thing because people are people. All right, surveillance. I think pretty soon we're going to see a lot more environmental sampling. You'll see why I say that, because in order to control this condition locally, nationally, internationally, we need to know where it is, where it hits, and we need to know it fast and cheaply. And having veterinarians go around to test birds is expensive, okay? Growers can do a lot by providing environmental sampling. We'll see that in a few minutes. Vaccination, strategic vaccination. I have a few slides on that. I was in Rome in May with FAO. We talked a lot about this, and I think it's coming. It's going to be strategic. We cannot vaccinate all the birds. We certainly cannot vaccinate broilers. There's no need. But we will eventually see many countries, developed countries, going ahead with vaccination, because it's not only to protect the birds, but it's also a matter of public health. You'll see why I say that. So one point I want to make is that you need to look at a farm of interest to you, whether it's your farm or a farm where you go as a technician and you need to assess the risk. It varies depending on the farms. We'll need to have good diagnostics. I think in Canada, we're already in pretty good shape. And now we need to look again at this on-farm biosecurity and regional biosecurity. But my point is that we're going to have to adjust how we do biosecurity according to each farms. The principles are one size fits all, but the way you do it on farms, you'll need to adjust depending on the circumstances. So I mentioned that we lack compliance. I don't have time to go through all this, but you see there's a long list of reasons why we lack compliance, and I can connect them to 5 keywords that I'm going to work on today. So design of the entry room, easiness. Is it easy to do what is being asked to do? You know, if you need to change boots, for example, put on coveralls or wash hands, how easy is it to do it on a farm? At the bottom, you have knowledge and feedback. You would be surprised about the lack of knowledge of some people working on farms. In particular, people who are helping part-time, coming from different places in the world, they may not have the knowledge that you would expect them to have as adults. And there's a lot of incoherent messages going on out there, and they need to get feedback, frequent feedback that's not being done as we speak. So I'll be mentioning a few things about it in a minute. And again, this regional perspective that we need to have, because this is all connected. So if you want to develop a biosecurity culture, you want to make sure that people are doing what they're supposed to do on a farm, here are the key elements. The first one at the bottom is the environment, okay? The design of the entry room, for example, has to make it easy to do things. You need to have necessary material. I was in France a few weeks ago, and I got on a farm. They had a beautiful sink, but it was full of crap. It had to be over 30 kilos of things. I was going to remove it, but then I thought, no, I'm going to get a bad back. So I left it there. Very often you don't have a soap, okay? Or the water is not running. So that's a problem. We need to focus on that. And then to focus on people's emotional intelligence. What you have here are important factors, including personality traits. Now, we've done research on this, and we know that personality is associated with compliance when it comes to biosecurity, okay? But we cannot change people's personality. Okay, you can try, yeah, it's not gonna happen. But emotional intelligence, which is your ability to cope with others, your self-awareness, all these things are important. And in other businesses, they've discovered that they can increase compliance when it counts, like pharmaceutical industry. When they talk about biosafety in labs and all that, that's important. They'll work on people's emotional intelligence, okay? In particular on motivation, and that requires getting people to understand what's important, have them assessed, and even have them with friendly competition if you have several employees, for example. These things are being done by a lot of companies worldwide, and it works. But that requires feedback. Okay, and that's why in innovations, you're going to see within a few years, maybe before, that we're going to be using sensors more and more, because we can then provide real-time feedback to people. All this leading to proper training. Right now, I know out west, like anywhere else in the world, you'll find all sorts of training programs. Sometimes it's online. I've seen things that make no sense. It goes in all directions, and it does not consider the fact that we're training adults, not kids, okay? Adults are different from kids. You can tell a kid what to do. It's not that simple with adults. Ever since I've started talking, everything I say, you are looking at your own life experience or knowledge to judge basically the information I'm providing you. And I'm about to talk to you about entry rooms and foot baths. You're going to see some of you may be a bit challenged there. But that's good, okay? That needs to be considered in training so that it can be effective. I don't have time to go further into this other than to say good news. If you're older, you may not be as fast as the younger one among us, but you're better at integrating knowledge, okay? Unless you have dementia. You're actually going to be better at handling complexity. So if you're older, don't worry, you can still be very much in the game. So anteroom design, an old study we did in 2011. This is odds ratio. So the number of times more that we had more compliance. Okay, if it was easy versus difficult, if you don't have the space, if you just have a line versus a physical barrier, okay, respecting the zones in the anteroom were 5 to 13 times better if like we had a bench, if we had the space, if the anteroom was not cluttered with a lot of stuff that sometimes will be there because it's convenient. If it's easy, whether it's layers, broilers, breeders, we found in all these types of operations that we had better compliance, okay? When it comes to a 2-zone or a 3-zone, the key thing where we have a problem is for hand washing. Very often it's not done at the right place, the right time. It has to be done as we are going to go from one zone to the next, okay? So if you have a 3-zone entrance, that's great. Then you would have a sink and water, I would hope, and it brings you the space to do what needs to be done to avoid contamination between zones, okay? A setup like the one you see is kind of neat because it's easy to dismantle and clean, okay? Again, the key word is easiness. What you have has to be easy to do for it to work. Now, changing boots is a big deal. That's one of the key risk factors for laryngotracheitis as well. And of course, with AI. What we did a few years ago, you can use a powder that with a black light, you can see so people get to shake your hand and show that they could transmit the powder to you. I wanted to do that with real bugs. Okay, and I did that with an E. coli that was modified so that, to put it simply, it could glow in the dark, okay? And so, of course, we did that in a lab environment. We did not release this in the Canadian industry. But what you have in the upper left corner are 3 zones. South of the red line, you have the contaminated entry, okay? And the first one, completely to the left, a change of boots was done correctly, so everything's dark because there's no contamination. The middle one, we didn't change boots. We just walked through, okay? The anteroom was 10 meters long, and there was no dilution effect. We had contaminations all the way for the 10 meters, okay? We also had a phage, which is kind of a proxy for a virus, okay? That was in our mix, and you see at the bottom, not changing boots, in blue and orange, you had the level of contamination, and it was pretty much steady, okay? Now, the third scenario, that's what I see the most on farms in Canada, United States, in Europe. I was in Asia late last year, same thing, okay? You get people who would like put plastic boots, for example, okay? And then they put it the foot back exactly where they were, contaminating the plastic boot. In France, okay, the government paid to add like empty rooms to buildings because they didn't have that in the Southwest. And so I went on 4 farms the first day, 2017, when they had problems. And 3 of the 4 farmers were showing me very carefully how to put the plastic boots on the contaminated side and then go on the clean side, okay? That's an issue, and you can see it. We have contamination. It's not as bad as not changing boots, but it is an issue. Now, foot baths. I thought we were done with this. But even in Quebec, I went on a farm recently, and a guy decided to improve his biosecurity by getting back with foot baths, okay? They are not only worthless, they're dangerous, okay? There's several reasons for this. This is part of my collection. I've got many slides on this. What can you see there is that it's impossible to go from one side to the next. You see, like the shower thing, okay, makes sense only if you can get in the shower on one side and exit on the other side, right? You're moving forward. You're contaminated, you decontaminate, then you go on the clean side. Try to do this with these foot baths, okay? Assuming they would work, okay? Impossible. I mean, look at that. They added a lid because it would protect the solution, but it's kind of stupid, okay? Because you have to go backwards, all right? And then there's the fact that there is not a disinfectant, okay, available on this planet that can decontaminate a boot that has no organic material on it in less than about 90 seconds. How many of you have spent over 1.5 minutes in a foot bath? If you've done that, you need to talk to the speaker before me. Okay. Now, this is just a study on phenols and quats, and you can see within 3 hours, you would increase contamination. Okay. Now, I've talked to all sorts of people about this, and I've got a lot of data to back this up. And they say, you know, here's the problem, JP. We understand you. We can see the data. But the problem is that for the past 30 years, we've been very religious about this. We've been putting a lot of pressure on people to change foot baths daily and all that. And now you're telling us that we need to say, you know what, forget about this, never worked. Okay. We're going to lose our credibility. Thankfully, I've got a solution for you. You can come in and say, you know what, we have a better product now. Okay. I'll look like a salesman for a minute, but what the heck. Dry bleach. Okay. Owen, several years ago, decided to use dry bleach instead. And he could show that when it came to bacterial count and residual life, now he was losing 2 logs. He was over 90% decontamination, and he didn't have to change the foot bath more than every other week. Okay. By contrast, you see that the residual life of wet foot baths is less than 2 hours. Okay. As a matter of fact, for it to work, you would have to spend a lot of time in the foot bath and change it after each person. Okay. Cindy Amos in swine, she used a product that cost 10 years ago, $52 US per foot bath. Okay. And she had the same kind of results. So it just doesn't work. But then again, if you're going to change, somebody asked me about a source of chlorine. Here's one. I'm not getting paid for this. Some people want to use lime. The problem with lime is that if you have liquid coming in, it's gonna heat up, and I have no data on that. There may be other products similar to chlorine that could do a similar job. But the point is stay away from wet stuff, okay? There's a study that came out, I don't have time to show you, but they could actually, okay, find after somebody who had boots contaminated with the high-path AI virus, okay, they could find the virus alive in the foot baths, okay? So we need to stay clear from this. And if you're using dry foot baths, don't do like this. You see, you can get around it. It has to be like a shower that you need to go through if you're going to use this type of measure. So lots of stuff on this slide. You can read it later. I just want to highlight a few points. Contact time is important. Most of these disinfectants, you know, quats with glutaraldehyde and all that, they need several minutes of contact time for it to work. Not having organic material. Dryness is very important between the different phases after washing and after disinfection. That makes a huge difference. And also doing monitoring. At the bottom, you see stuff, the difference between concrete and wood. I had a graduate student that I shared with somebody else at Guelph, University of Guelph, and wood will stay contaminated at least 10 times more than concrete, right? Because it's porous. And if you have a very old building like this one was made the year my mother was born, 1926, okay? It's still working, but at one point you have to ask yourself, you know, maybe it's no longer possible to decontaminate when it gets that old. I have great stories about stuff in Europe where they actually used wood from Canada after the war to make barns, and they're still trying to decontaminate that. So that's an issue. So when it comes to, I said transportation is a big deal. If you want to decontaminate, this is one study where they look at glass, metal, rubber, plastic, and they put that in the windshield on the middle and in the undercarriage. Okay, and they did just wash with disinfection with chlorine dioxide. Okay, and that was like a 30-second rinse. Okay, and here you see the difference in the log 10 reduction. So for example, our 4 log reduction would be reducing contamination 10,000 times. Okay, so if you can hit 4, that is great. It's like decontaminating 99.99% of what you've got. And you can see that it's when you add a disinfectant that you can reach better results. And you can also see that undercarriage remains an issue. A lot of studies have been published recently on this. Undercarriage is difficult to decontaminate. We need to work on that. But the first thing is we need to make sure we don't have organic material. Because when they did this study, they did it also by, after putting a virus, that would be their way of knowing if the job was done right or not. They put also organic material for some experiments, and sometimes they put nothing. They just contaminated the glass, the rubber, the plastic without adding organic material. Well, if it was not soiled, well, adding a disinfectant was 247 times more efficient than just washing. But if you had soiled material, okay, it would still be improved, but not as well. Okay, so removing organic material is a big deal, and you want to make sure there's good monitoring, sanitation. One big problem the French got with HiPath AI, and last year they got 1,338 infected commercial farms. So they're starting to know at least what not to do. Okay, and they looked at slaughter plants and the decontamination of trucks, of trailers in slaughter plants, and they could demonstrate that some trucks were coming with birds negative would leave the slaughter plant after washing and decontamination contaminated with the virus. Okay, big problem. So you need to check this out. You need to be able to look visually, and one thing that needs to be looked at, whether it's a truck, well, of course, if you're on the farm, look at neglected areas that sometimes we don't think about, tractors, tillers, drinkers, that kind of stuff. And when it comes to monitoring, when I was in the United States, we had a company, they were using either tapes, but even better, a spray. And a spray with fluorescent color, something really outrageous, like lime or orange. And because the people there were saying, if you're not happy because you can still find organic material and you tell the employee or the grower you have to redo all over again, that's depressing. They'll get discouraged. And sometimes it's just a few places that they need to fix. So you go there, you see organic material, you spray it, and you go to the technician and say, look, go in there, wherever you find orange, work on it. And what they discovered, of course, is they were always spraying time after time the same areas. Okay, so then you discover where you need to focus on. And after that, if you want to make sure the job is right, you can get instruments now to check ATP bioluminescence. So let's say you've got clean water, you will test it, and you'll get a reading of less than 10. Okay, the other day I went into a foot bath and got a reading of 60,000. Okay, that takes 13 seconds to get the reading, so it's real time. The equipment costs maybe close to $1,000, and then each test is about $1.50. So overall, it's not that expensive. I don't have time to go through all the process for decontamination, avoiding contaminating a cab, but I have a great story for you. When I was in Thessaloniki in Greece, it was a swine meeting, and they presented, they are very afraid in swine about African swine fever. You heard of that? Well, they had a case in commercial farms in Europe where they sampled absolutely everywhere because they got a farm infected and they knew it came from wild hogs. But how did it get in? They tested everything. Then they found the virus on the seat of a truck. So they asked who was driving this, and they got the guy and they tested his butt, or actually his pants, okay? And they found the virus there, okay? So we have to be very careful to avoid contamination of the cab because obviously that employee got access to the pigs. And if you've been to a pig farm and you don't pay attention, you're in the pen with them, you may feel something in your butt, you know. At least we don't have that too often with poultry, but still the risk is there. So we need to have good protocols to decontaminate, even have insecticides to prevent if we have flies coming in, okay? Decontaminate material that has been used going from farm to farm. And of course, if this is a difficult process to get in and out of a truck like that. So if you have to do it several times on the same farm, at least in the United States, what they do is they get a helper or they ask the grower to get involved so that the truck driver stays there, you know, in the cab. A quick one on hand washing. Several farms don't have running water in empty rooms. So I did a study looking at 4 protocols. We have Purell everywhere in Canada, even before COVID, right? So I had one just using Purell, one using a degreasing cream that they have in garages because it's without water, and then Purell, soap and water and Purell, or industrial wipes, okay? And we asked catchers to catch at least 3,000 birds, and then we tested their hands, and then we asked them, do any of these protocols, okay? We discovered a few things. First of all, about 12% of the guys had salmonella on their hands after catching birds. And any of these protocols made salmonella disappear. At least we could not find it again. Okay, might still be there, but the hands were decontaminated enough that we could not find it again. The other thing was the fact that degreasing cream with Purell or soap and water with Purell were the best protocols if you have heavy contamination with your hands. Another interesting finding is that it doesn't matter how many times you press on the Purell thing, okay? Some went as far as 7, okay? Because we were telling them, we're not going to tell you wash your hands for 1 minute, okay? Because that's not real. So you do the protocol as you wish. We're going to film you. So we'll know how many seconds you decontaminate your hands. And it varied between 19 and 26 seconds, which is about normal, okay? So you know, if you want to save a little bit of money, you don't need to use that much Purell to have an impact. But what we discovered as well, half the catchers were from Guatemala. And they told us, we like soap and water, but in Canada, if your water is cold, no, we're not going to do it, okay? Because it's too cold. So when we're talking about biosecurity compliance, I know it's not obvious to get hot water in barns, but for sure, their point was, if you want us to comply, make sure that we actually enjoy doing what you're asking us to do. Vaccination, very briefly, this is slides from Europe. You cannot just vaccinate and say we reduce our risks, okay? Because once you vaccinate, you have AI positive birds. That's an issue, okay? So we're going to have need a DIVA strategy. That name came from an Italian woman, okay? I'm not making this up. It's differentiating infected from vaccinated animals. We're going to need to have diagnostics, okay? Very quick, cheap diagnostics to differentiate vaccinated birds from birds infected with the live strain, okay? So it's not going to happen tomorrow, but they're working on it. We'll need intensive surveillance as well. They're doing controlled trials in France. By the end of the year, they're going to start doing field studies on commercial farms. So it's actually being done in Ecuador as well. Right now, stuff coming from Mexico. The Mexicans have been doing it for years with mixed results, all right? Now, of course, it's an international issue. I was in that FAO meeting. I'm actually sitting on the front row there in May, and we discussed vaccination. But the first thing is, before talking about vaccination, the big issue was, is it endemic? Is it going to disappear? Because if it does, I mean, great. Well, these so-called experts were saying, ain't not gonna disappear like that, okay? The original H5N1 has been around since '96 anyway, and we're in 2023. And we have, it's endemic in close to 80 countries now in the world, okay? So we have a pandemic type situation, and we have clandestine vaccination in some countries, which will make it worse because they're using modified live vaccine, which is not appropriate. Okay, because it can revert to being pathogenic. So we have a big issue there. They're going to release a report soon where they say that we need to evaluate the use of vaccination nationally and in some specific region, having the right vaccine for each region, okay? But the emphasis will be put on biosecurity, surveillance, using new generation vaccine. You know, the RNA type vaccine for COVID, we actually have that now for Hypath AI. They're developing it also for humans. The big thing that they were saying in Rome is that countries like Canada may need to do it if for no other reason to protect human beings. Okay, so we're going to get a lot of pressure to have this done. It will be done only for strategic reasons on farms that have birds that live long, okay? Egg layers, breeders, that type of bird, okay? And the big challenge, of course, it's an influenza virus. You know, if you've been vaccinated for influenza, for human influenza, they'll tell you, well, these are the antigens we think correspond to what's out there. We don't know if the vaccine will work. Sometimes learn it didn't work, okay? Because you have the virus here, and here's the vaccine. And the sad thing is this 2344 clade, okay, has a bunch of variants that are antigenetically very distinct, okay? And that is a problem. A quick one before I stop. I said surveillance is a big deal, and we're going to move towards environmental surveillance, I believe. This is a study where they look at doing tracheal swab, okay, requiring technicians and all that. They look at the sensitivity of the test on farms with clinical signs and farms without clinical signs, okay? So C's for clinical, non-clinical. And they also did environmental sampling. They went to two places. The fans in the buildings, get some dust there, and dust on top of the feeders, okay? Put that in an envelope, send that to a lab, PCR. That was the best result. The sensitivity of the tests using environmental sampling was the best with dust compared to testing the birds or testing the air. The last two is air sampling because that's also being looked at. And Grund in Germany late last year said that if you have this type of drinker, the most sensitive way to make sure you have the virus or not is to test the water, okay? Because that's where you're going to find it. Okay, now ventilation. I could not come here without talking about ventilation. It's been an issue everywhere in the world. Many years ago, we look at positive ventilation, which is not what we do in practice, right? If you look, so the studies on that are pretty old, but we're starting to see more and more studies. I went to academia.edu and typed poultry farm air filtration and look at the number of hits I've been getting. There's over 6,000 papers now that have been published, and it's coming about at a frequency of 1 a day on poultry farm air filtration right now, okay? So we're going to learn quite a bit. In Georgia, they're kind of saying, yeah, but, you know, for primary breeders, but for regular farms, we don't recommend it. That being said, there's more and more evidence that there is some aerosol transmission, not over several kilometers. If you have transmission over several kilometers, could be flies, okay? could be wild animals, could be all sorts of things. But over 100 meters or a little bit more, certainly. And there are different ways the virus will get within a farm like that and then may move through aerosol, in particular via dust, okay? So that's a study in Scandinavia where they put like a diaper to air inlet. And they tried to see what kind of stuff they would find. They found feces, feathers, paper, plants, plastic, cobweb, all sorts of things coming in, okay? And the virus can be on this, okay? Now, they did not catch flies in this particular study, other insects, but flies are an issue. This is results at the right side of pools of flies. We gave two bunch of, you know, this sticky thing with the flies. We have a technician who actually counted the flies we gave them, okay? They, hey, talk about dealing with stress. And we could find flies positive, not only in the barn where we had the virus, but on like, let's say the upper, if you had a 2 floor, on the 2nd floor, we don't have the disease in birds, but we have flies, and we could find the virus in these flies. And we know that it will not stay long on the flies, but it will last up to 3 to 4 days in the fly, okay? And a fly can go 2 to 3 kilometers in a day. And I've seen some doing 80 kilometers in a day with me, of course, in my car, okay? Well, we're laughing, but that's serious. We need to consider that. Now, the good news is we look at darkling beetles because darkling beetles are a big issue for a lot of diseases. But even in the barns where we had a hypatia and hundreds of thousands of darkling beetles, they stayed negative, okay? So at least that's something less to worry about. USDA last month, actually early in this month, that was one of the slides from Delgado. She said, you know, the newer ventilation systems and all that associated with 82% less likely to become positive to hypatia. Now, we don't know really what that means, okay? There may be confounding factors there, but it's something to look at. And this brings me to a concept that I think is very important. I'm over time, but I don't care because I think that's important, okay? When we have an infection, it's because we have a chain of infection that's complete. See, you need to have the infectious agent. It needs to be somewhere in a reservoir like wild birds next to your farm. It needs to be able to exit, okay, to be transmitted on your boots, for example, and reach a susceptible host. That is the chain of infection. But there are 3 concepts here that are important. The fact that the virus is present, yes or no. Okay, that's one thing. But also the infection pressure, okay? And that is the quantity of pathogens that will get in contact with the host. Because the 3rd concept is infective dose, okay? In many cases, for many diseases, you can have viruses and bacteria, but if they're not enough of them, they will not infect the animal. So, for example, in pigs, they had problems with PRRS and farrowing units. So they started to have ventilation systems with HEPA filters. Okay, HEPA filters are very costly, but if you have a 3,000 sow unit, it will pay for itself in 8 months. Okay, but they realize you don't need that all the time. Okay, they wouldn't need that if you have like a lot of grow out facilities next door with like 40 different sources of pigs coming in from who knows where. Yes, now you need to have HEPA filters. But they discovered that over 90% of the time, just to have some biofilters would prevent their farrowing units from going down because PRRS is highly transmitted by aerosol for kilometers, okay, much more than hypatia. That's why that concept is important because you may elect to do some biofiltering, okay, on your in your farm, and it won't be perfect, but it might be good enough. For sure, if you improve the air quality, you'll improve welfare, better performance. It may help for other diseases, but who knows? It might help you with hypatia. So I'm not saying you should all be doing this, but if you're in a high risk, highly density area with duck farms nearby and all that, that's worth considering. There's several papers that are coming out. I've listed some there with all sorts of strategies, and some are looking at how to prevent the virus from exiting from your barn, if you have it, okay? Or how to prevent it from getting into your barns, because both strategies have merit, okay? I don't have time to go through this, but just to give you an example, this was done recently, 2018, and I think it was done in Saskatchewan. And they look at electrostatic air filtration system, fairly simple approach. They look at what it would do to the inside temperature and relative humidity. And you see the red line is pretty stable in both cases compared to the blue one, which was the outside temperature and relative humidity. So they were saying that filtration thing is not clogging anything, is not having a negative impact on ventilation. And then they look at the removal efficiency of PM, which is particle matters. And in the summer, they could reach 86% removal of particle matters of dust coming into the barn. In winter, round 2 was less effective. What we don't know is if this will make an impact or not for Hypatia, but I can tell you daily we're getting more information about this kind of stuff. The Americans found that you were more likely to get on some controlled farms structural windbreak, like hills, vegetation and all that. So they looked at it a little bit further with different of evergreen and trees and all that. They didn't see a difference. But the truth is, if you have a natural barrier, okay, you will have an impact at 2 levels. Less particle contamination and less flies if it's well done, okay? So that might be something also worth considering if you want to protect a farm. Landscaping is also something that'd be worthwhile, all right? The key here is, you know, for COVID, they were saying you need layers and redundance, you know, cloth mask, social distancing and all that. The idea is nothing's perfect, but we try to do the same thing with biosecurity on farms. You have a list at the bottom. The idea is to try to find maybe additional things. Like, for example, this dry chlorine might be something useful. You know by now, I don't believe in for bats, okay? But if you're going to use some, I would encourage you to use this kind of stuff and maybe consider non-HEPA air filtration. If you're trying HEPA filtration, you're going to fail, okay? Because it's going to be clotted within a day. We've tried that. So that's not a way to go. But the point is you need to look at each farm, look at the easiest way to target some risk factors with the concepts of removing sources of contamination and bringing separation. I don't have time for all this, but I'm going to finish with this. If you want to improve compliance, improve biosecurity, need to reach the right people. In Quebec, our growers are trained. If they have employees, often they're not. We assume that the growers are training them. They might, they may not, okay? They are an important risk. We need to provide them with an easy way to do what they need to do. Rewards are something worth considering. There's 2 types of rewards. You know, if you don't do this, you're fired. That's a negative reward, okay? But you can have positive rewards. I could give you a full talk on this for rewards that are not expensive, including just saying, hey, you did a good job this week. That actually has an impact. It's been looked at, okay? So, and training, getting buy-in from everybody that has access to the farm, that's the way to go. And I'm finishing with the lower left image. When we did the surveillance for compliance, we had hidden cameras in empty rooms. So we knew exactly what people were doing. And we discovered that if people were coming in for less than 5 minutes, they would not comply as much as for 1 hour. In fact, people coming in for at least an hour were 35 times more likely to comply compared to 5 minutes. So be very concerned about these people who come in and out because they may not want to go through the whole thing. With this, I'll let you go. Thank you.